Before I introduce our distinguished panel of three people, I just want to introduce a couple of gentlemen in the back of the room who are partners making this panel possible. They're from the UK Department of International Trade. They're sitting in the back. They're waving right now. If you have any questions for them later, there they are. You can go up to them and ask them anything you want. My name is George Salai. I'm the international business editor at The Hollywood Reporter. I'm based in London. Used to be based in New York, so I've covered the business on 2 different continents, and I've been trying to write more and more about the international TV business and how it's changing. And some of the people we have here today can talk about how their brands and their channels have been changing. Let me start off with Andrew right next to me, Andrew O'Connell. He's the VP Development and Production at Discovery. Then next to him, we have Chris Lovell, VP International Programming for AMC and Sundance TV. And then we have Laura Fleury, who's in town from New York. She's the Senior VP, Head of Programming International at A&E Networks. Why don't we start off with like a quick first question. I know I'll focus a lot on Andrew in the first one because we're going to go see a clip from him. Maybe Andrew, talk a little bit about how Discovery has been kind of trying to position itself differently in a changing market in the last few years, and what you've been trying to commission and put on the screen for people to watch.
Well, I'm relatively new. I've only been there a year, so I can only talk from my experience in the time that I've been there. But Discovery has always been a company that evolves, and it's always on the front foot, and it's always looking to see what the new trends are and how we can be pushing the boundaries in an ever-changing world. And that's not only in the content strategy, it's also in the business strategy of buying digital companies, so forth and so on. But in terms of the creative side of it, we've got a pretty strong, robust brand, and within that, our genres are pretty strong, and we have 9 of the top 10 shows out on cable network at the moment, so the bar's incredibly high. So for us to reinvent, re-innovate, it is very, very difficult for us because we're always comparing ourselves against what we already have, which is very successful across all the genres, as I say. But having said that, we are at a point now where we have been working incredibly hard, and we have to work even harder to re-innovate and look at things in a different way, and possibly also look to what worked a few years ago that we can reposition, reimagine, and bring back into the linear space.
Now, Chris and Laura, reinvention, kind of repositioning and updating the brand. How key has it been for you and your companies?
I think for everybody in the marketplace, whatever side you're on, scripted, unscripted, it's how to make content that cuts through and finding stories that have appeal to your audience, whether that's domestic or global, and making noise, showing something new, showing something fresh, and I think that's the key to driving the innovation.
Absolutely, and I think that we have a portfolio of brands, which includes the History Channel, which is what I'm going to be talking about a little bit more today. But History Channel is a global brand. It's also kind of a super genre, and so a lot of the conversation across all of the A&E networks is how are we really clear about who we are and what kind of stories we tell, and how do we tell those stories on all the different platforms that everyone is talking about and thinking about. But I agree, it ultimately comes down to what are those great stories you are telling, and so that is always the forefront of everyone's mind, which is what's on the development slate. And the great thing about History being such an international brand and so successful internationally is that those ideas can come from anywhere. And so some projects that we're doing now are actually initiating outside of the U.S. and going across all of our channels. In some cases, not even including the U.S. So there's a lot of more opportunities because as we need to have brands that are globally resonant, we need to have channels and brands that are locally relevant. And that's another way in which we're trying to innovate.
So I'm hearing go global, be attractive locally, cut through, make noise. Maybe we go to the first clip from
Can I just
Andrew? Yeah, sure.
Just pick up on that, and that's part of why I was put in place in the UK. Is exactly to that point? Is that Rich Ross and Denise Contis saw that the UK creative industry is at the forefront of innovation always having to think about what's next, what's new. And there are great companies that are already working into the US. So they thought, well, let's get somebody in here that's a direct pipeline into the US. So it's just talking to that point.
Mm-hmm. Can we roll the Discovery clip and see how you guys are trying to make noise and cut through?
That sounds deep.
Hey, Tuck.
Yes, sir.
I don't feel like we can go forward anymore. Reach the dead end.
What is it, man? Talk to me.
I feel like it's dropping off on the side over here. Stay on this.
How far down are you, buddy? I mean, I feel like I'm 2 feet above you right now.
Off to the side of me. I gotta back up a little bit. Scoot. I'm going down.
Well, the hardest part of all is the unknown. We keep struggling with unanswered questions and all. But as a family, we've always dealt with the unknown. That's been our life. We've been in the bush a long time, and every day's the unknown. We've been in unknowns where you walk into a valley that no one's been in, and you don't know what's there. Everything we have has gone to get here, and to do this, we're obligated now. This is home. We've had the total unknown. Am I about to get mauled by that bear, or is he going to turn around?
Hit it!
So we've had plenty of practice in knowing that if our family stays strong in faith in the family and faith in the good Lord, we're going to get through, we're going to be able to deal with it.
Now, Andrew, Discovery often has been kind of known for adventure, science, nature. This seems to fit in with it, but maybe talk a little bit about key other attributes of the brand that you're looking for. I think you mentioned earlier that character is becoming more and more important. Do you talk about that a little bit?
Character is very important to our channel and to our viewers. Big characters, big worlds, kind of real worlds. Authenticity is key for most everything that we do. To the first clip, it was that we were looking at how we kind of take genre and move the genre of survival on away from dual survivals, Naked and Afraid XL, which do fantastic business for us, particularly the Nakeds. And this was going into immersive tests, we ended up calling it, but it was another way of how we can put people under severe tests to see how they react in extreme conditions. And this particular one came out of a producer, his daughter coming into his room at 3 o'clock in the morning saying, "Dad, can I jump into bed? I'm scared of the dark." And that was what started the conversations that ended up with darkness. And the thing about what's key for us, if we're doing anything in survival, immersive tests, or any of those constructs around this genre, we've got to have a real-life measurement for it. So it's got to have played out in the real world. And this was extrapolated out of NASA training and Special Forces training, that they do for their troops. And it's a show that's just aired. We've had 2 of them over the summer. We've got another 5 to come. And it's a big swing for us because the whole thing's in darkness. You put in cave systems and you put in tunnel systems, and 3 people arrive at different times, at different points. They find each other and they've got to get out. They've got 6 days in the dark, and it's quite claustrophobic. It's you may think it's quite a tough watch, but it's a fascinating watch. But it was a big swing for us. So I thought it was a really, really bold, good commission, and those are the kind of plays that we're looking for in that area. So big swings in survival. The off-grid clip there is our biggest show in the off-grid genre. They're incredible characters. Family is key to off-grid for us. But we're looking for new locations and new processes for what makes homesteading that much tougher if you're in a new location. So they are, that's a good example of great characters, for Discovery.
Now, Laura, great characters. How important is it for the history brand?
We always talk about the H in history being human, right? So it's the history through the prism of human endeavor and characters, really. I mean, I think that I think that's true of most great stories. They involve, you're identifying with a character or a set of characters. In our case, these are, there's some sort of historical context. I think that, what's great about the example of the Alaska show is that it transcends, like, I don't care about off the grid stuff. I just think it's a really interesting family, and I think that's where it gets exciting. And I think we're always looking for those types of shows that, you know, you don't have to care about transaction to love the guys in Pawn Stars. But if you are a person who really loves information, and, you know, being smart is cool, which is something that we're really trying to tap into and really make history relatable on every level, from, you know, history happening, you know, being something that we experience every day and is actually being made every day. It allows us to go back and look at stories from the past through a present tense lens. In many cases, reinvestigating, let's say, something, and there's a clip that'll come up on that. But again, all these are stories about people. They've either done something, or were involved in some big change in history, or involved today, like in our Hunting Hitler series. They're involved today in trying to figure out, well, what really happened. Mm-hmm. You know, did he survive after, you know, or did he commit suicide?
Now, Chris, I assume you have a slightly different take on character, because you're coming from the kind of scripted view. Talk a little bit about the importance of characters. I think everybody here has fallen in love with shows, you know, Breaking Bad and other shows you've done based on characters. But talk about what's maybe changing in your thinking about characters.
You know, I think, you know, the story always comes down to character, and certainly there are more, you know, there are different types of series. Some are more, you know, muscular, adrenaline-based, high concept, and some are, you know, just come down to really interesting interpersonal dynamics, relationships. You know, I think more and more what's exciting to me is just as the consumers, and I say that, you know, globally, are finding different voices that they're tapping into. It's giving us more creativity in terms of who we can go to, types of characters we can show, you know, parts of the world, experiences, cultural perspectives that maybe, you know, weren't in the norm or the mainstream a few years ago. And now with the audience kind of going to find best content wherever it's from, that just lets us, you know, tap into new worlds and subcultures and what have you.
Now we have another clip from Andrew called Homestead Rescue. Maybe we'll watch it, then maybe, Andrew, you can give us a little bit of the explanation how it fulfills the brand promise for Discovery.
6 days ago, the Rainies found a family and their livestock battling against the bitter Canadian winter.
I can't even get the water home without it freezing.
While living in constant fear of attack from North America's most fearsome predator.
He's been known to kill fully grown horses and cows.
Now on the Rainies' last day, Marty and Todd are installing the windows in the door to the new barn that will act as a workshop for blacksmith Todd, a shelter for their newborn livestock, and a heated shop to stop the homestead's water from freezing.
Give it a tap-a-roo. Done.
Okay. Yeah, that's nice. That'll keep the wind out and the snow. A place to work, a place to keep me home with my family. I cannot believe it.
So the reason I picked this particular clip and or show is its format. And that's something that we are, you know, really trying to crack and get more on air. That is, if you break it down, that is a makeover show by any other description, but it's set in our world. It's set in the, you know, the off-grid space. It's people who live remotely that haven't been able to, you know, build their properties properly, or they've had issues and problems. We've cast the Rainey family who've lived in Alaska doing it for the last 30 years. They come in and they solve problems for them. Closed episodes, very clean, set in our world. And we are actively, aggressively looking for more formats in the build space, in the skill space, and in the survival space. So, you know, that's one of my big messages. And because, as I say, the UK community is fantastic at concepts formats, I'm working closely with a lot of producers and a lot of producers out here to hopefully bring a couple into the US in the next 6 months.
Interesting. Now, Laura, formats, how important are those for you, and how do you feel about makeover shows, history makeover?
Well, formats are incredibly important. Obviously, the transactional space has been a huge place of success for History Channel with Pawn Stars and American Pickers and all the international versions of those that have been made. We, as Forged in Fire is a more recent example of a show that's sort of like a chopped, but with the craft of making weapons and who does it the best. And what's interesting about that is that encompasses a lot of the things that we are looking for in history, which is a return to sort of expertise in craft and doing things by hand, which is sort of a lost art in most places. And is because of all of our technology and the fact that mostly of us are sitting at computers all day, there's something really refreshing and sort of optimistic about looking at that. There's also that sort of transformation of you starting from nothing and then creating the weapon. And then you just have it's a great format and it travels really well, and we have different versions of it being made around the world. So the beauty of creating a format is that it can be character-led or not character-led, meaning recurring, continuing characters or different characters each week. But the great thing about a format is that you can make a lot of them. They usually travel well internationally. You can make local versions of them, and they help to also define your brand because it's a name that everyone knows. So hugely important, as is for us. Really owning historical scripted drama and then those big sort of marquee types of specials and things like that. But yeah, formats are great. We love them.
Now you brought us a clip of a show called Alone.
Another format that is
Denmark
Alone, and yeah, it's apparent. It seems harder.
Okay.
There than in the U.S. But go ahead.
Can we maybe roll that clip to give a little bit of a feel for how you're putting formats to work?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I notice a lot of the clips we've seen so far kind of play in the wild. Like living in London, I'm far away from that. You're in New York. Why is the wild such a big playground for maybe history and discovery? And do we see that in the AMSC and Sundance kind of drama scripted space as well?
Well, just on it's not normally the space of History Channel. It's generally owned by Discovery. So the goal when we came across this opportunity was how do we make it right for us, and also by it being on History, it sort of draws attention to itself as sort of being. The bar for us is in a different. We have a different set of challenges of what we have to bring to the table, and what's really cool about this iteration of what Alone became was. It was the first thing you have to do is you're dropped with a partner, but you're separated from your partner. So the first thing you have to do is you have to find each other, and then you have to live, which I thought was really cool. So it has a little bit of that Amazing Race quality where you put two people into a situation and how are they going to manage it. So in this case, the wild is really it's almost the equivalent of the craft, which is to say going back to basics. What are the things that what does it take to be a real man type of thing? Which of course we all would want to be able to survive in a situation if we were challenged, and so few of us have that knowledge because it's not part of our normal upbringing now. So I think that's one of the pieces that makes it that we tap into the historical context of where this used to be how we all lived, and we used to all know this stuff, and
so
now we don't.
So it fits your filter.
Yeah.
Now, Andrew, are you jealous of that show? Would you have loved to have that on Discovery?
Personally, yes. It is similar to to the space that we have all our survival adventure shows in. So it is quite there are a lot of elements to that would fit our filters as well. I personally think it's a really good show.
Now, Chris, to what degree does kind of survival and nature and all bears play into what you're thinking about, and to what degree does it not play into it at all?
Well, I think it shouldn't go without being said. Walking Dead, Fear the Walking Dead. I mean, that's a world that that's turned upside down on its head, and I think that the idea of wild to us, exploring something that you think you used to know, you think you knew the logic of it, the rules of it, and now it's not what it appears to be, is a little bit more how it comes into dramatic storytelling. But I think, you know, I've seen, you know, trends to some stories that are starting to kind of move out to Africa and South America, and kind of setting themselves in more adventure type environments. Some interesting stuff, you know, around exploration in the Amazon and things like that. And I can't help but think that that's, you know, not being influenced by the types of shows that these guys are making, you know, really kind of showing other worlds. And I think that, you know, there is a creative kind of circular motion. And I think we inform some things you guys do, and vice versa. It's informing us.
And, you know, you guys said you're looking for show ideas from people in the UK or elsewhere. People in the UK, to what degree do they have to bring something that's set here or that feeds in cultural sensitivities from here? To what degree are you open to them bringing something to you that's maybe set further away from the UK? Maybe we'll just run through the panel for a second.
I think if it's into the Discovery US channel, it's got to be American sensibility with American characters. But you don't have to pitch up with a show reel of characters. You can pitch up with a world that you've either found, or a concept, or a format. And from there, we give development money to go and find the characters, because, as Laura said earlier, you know, the characters are central, but you come to them in different ways. You come to them through concepts, worlds, formats, and so forth. So we can go global, and we will go global, and we are looking at some big global pieces, and that they are much more generic, big, sort of, you're going into be it engineering or finds and anthropology or Egypt, you know, so forth. If there's something new and big and it's going to be a global newsworthy story, then yes, that's, you know, that plays out as it would anywhere, I would imagine. But if it's particularly for Discovery, it's got to be American. Yeah.
Now, Chris, your parent company, MC Networks, has this deal with BBC America, obviously, and there's like a lot of relationships with British talent creatives. Talk a little bit about how important that is, and to what degree from them you look for stuff that's set here or somewhere else.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, BBC America obviously has a great heritage and connection to the parent brand, and for a long time was bringing in those great UK writers and those voices that hadn't heard. You know, what's fun about the landscape now is the fact that, you know, audiences have flocked to shows all over the world, you know, the Borgans and what have you. So they are open to other types of stories. So we don't need to have anything brought to us that has an American way in. You know, kind of the bad co-production model a few years ago was, you know, I've got a German character here and a British character here and an American character, and I think a lot of people ended up with content that just felt watered down and not like what any of them hoped it would have been. So the fact that we can just go into a show that's completely set in, you know, Britain or Australia or Africa, you know, is great. And I think that, you know, a lot of these settings and these worlds that are getting explored are inherently international. I mean, we are moving around more, we're crossing more. So you're running into characters of different backgrounds and in the content. So
also with drama, and this is just a complete, you know, personal view, the quality of drama across the world, you know, has just risen so much that, you know, the storytelling, and people would now consume it, whereas maybe 15 years ago would be seen as too niche or not quite right. So, I mean, it's a golden era, isn't it, for drama?
Definitely.
Amazing.
Yeah, and I mean, just dovetailing off the drama conversation, for, you know, History Channel has had some great success with scripted drama, historical scripted drama, which we are committed to doing a lot more of. And Vikings is a huge hit for us, obviously not American. And Nightfall, about the Knights Templar, which is really good and coming out soon, is clearly not American focused either. However, when it comes to the unscripted stories that are originating out of the US, so sort of premiering on the US channel or produced out of the US team, they tend to be US focused. We've certainly done international stories like War on Terror and things like this. So there are global productions that have global subject matter, but it's usually through that American filter. The great news is because History Channel is the most internationally distributed. We're in we're available to 330 million subscribers. I just thought that was worth sharing because it's such a big number, and bigger than Netflix. We have really, really strong teams in all different parts of the world, particularly here in the UK. So there's an entire team, a channel team, which actually runs all of our the entire UK JV, which is about 80 countries, where we have the History Channel airing. And there is a great opportunity to originate History Channel productions out of the UK team, which means we don't necessarily need the US team involved to do a global project together. So a global co-production, it might be a full UK commission. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that, so it could be a truly UK-focused story, which is actually great for the History Channel here in the UK. And so we're looking for the ways that, what are the stories that are truly global, that are going to travel and work all around the world? What are the projects that by necessity need to either originate out of the international division or originate out of one of our regions? So I think most of you know Heather Jones and Dan Korn, who are head programming, in charge of all the programming across all the A&E channels based out of the UK. So if you don't know them, they're another avenue. Obviously, New York is another. So we can sort of approach it both ways and see if we can get something through.
And Laura, you brought us a clip that brings together a little bit of Britishness with a little bit of an American story. Maybe we can run that and show how that works.
This is, again, a lot of things that we look for all rolled up in one. Quite a character there. Telling the story of two pretty significant characters in history, and coming to a story that we think we all know with a fresh perspective, with real, with evidence. You can debate it, but this is all fact based in terms of at least the points of connection and the at least circumstantial evidence that suggests that they could have been, it could be the same guy. And another really important strand of history and making history relevant is this idea of exploring things that are maybe not yet understood, even though so much time has passed, and also the fun of just investigation and the unexplained. So it sort of falls into the same bucket as programs that have been incredibly successful for us, like Ancient Aliens and Hunting Hitler and the JFK investigation series. And so this is a huge pillar for it to make history every day. It's sort of the present day experience of history, but bringing something fresh new perspectives, fresh new evidence to these stories. And in this case, he's 100% convinced, and it was a very successful series for us.
Now, Chris, when you watch clips from their shows, do you notice that they're trying to up the production value to kind of maybe look a little bit more like the scripted stuff that's been so cinematic that you guys have put on? Or to what degree do you think this is still looking very different from what we do in terms of production value?
I think in general, production values are going up across the board, and I think that's good for everything that we're doing. I definitely think that there are series that lend themselves, better to kind of this combination of reenactments versus, if you looked at the scripted version of that show, it wouldn't be as interesting without having the present day, connection, or you would have to figure out a different device to tell that story. So, I mean, I think it's great that there are more productions that seem to be, finding that bigger scope, because I think the audiences, they crave those more elevated productions.
You're also getting a lot more of the Hollywood elite, getting involved in factual a bit as executive producers and so forth, and that's also elevating both style and also production value. And that's really cool.
We have a nice year coming ahead with a new AMC series called Visionaries, where we're working with, we're kind of doing a deep dive exploration docuseries on, the world of comic books. We've got James Cameron, leading a look into you know, the behind-the-scenes filmmaking of, you know, the greatest sci-fi stories, you know, and then we're moving on to other subject matter. So, you know, I think that it's incredible to see the talent kind of moving back and forth between lanes that they used to traditionally occupy and, you know, trying their hands in other pieces of content.
And traditionally, they would look down on the other ones. You know, you wouldn't cross over at all. So it's, yeah, it's all merging, isn't it?
Now, before we go to Chris's clip, let's show Laura's last clip. You mentioned the show before, Forged in Fire, or Project Runway for weapons makers. Can we run this clip, please?
Yeah, since this is an international conference, I'll share a small thing, which is, you know, it speaks to character too, but also localization. So our Poland History Channel, which is a small team, but they're really, really creative, and they didn't have the money to do a totally local version, so they shot just an intro and an outro with a local craftsman who told about the history of that craft in the country, but also about how it's been passed down in his family and the whole thing. And it was about maybe 3 minutes, beautifully shot, and put it to the top and tail of the show. And it was amazing how much it transformed a show that the characters in which were quite American, and all of a sudden it felt like it really felt locally relevant, and it was very, very successful for them. So, and we're copying and doing that in every country. But yes, so it's sort of the universality of all these themes is something we're always looking for in history. And I think just back to the scripted conversation about the level of play, which is everything from production value just to great storytelling. And there's sort of been, as much as we can talk about the threat of things like Netflix, there's also the democratization in a way that's happened because of the fact that great content can be consumed so easily. So something like Narcos, which probably wouldn't have been consumed in the way it was because it was, you know, mostly not in English, would never have been successful in the way that it was now. And in addition, you're getting these really high level actors who would never be in a TV show, let alone a TV show on cable, are now, they seem to really enjoy the creative freedom and the types of projects they're able to do. So I feel like that this is just a great time of opportunity for all of us.
Now we'll stick with the theme of danger, and we'll go to your clip, Chris. Do you want to set that up briefly? We have a clip of...
Yeah, so this is a clip of our new Sundance series premiering in September. It's a co-production with All3 and ITV from Jack and Harry Williams called Liar, starring Joanne Froggatt and Ioan Gruffudd. Topical, timely.
I know there's more danger, you know, one of the underlying themes. Why is danger and, you know, how humans deal with it such a big topic these days? We have such comfortable lives. Why don't we just kind of focus on the good things?
I think for Liar, you know, in particular, there's some really interesting social conversations that have been happening in the world, and in terms of, you know, this story centers on issues of consent and. You know, he said, she said is a story that we still hear far too much about. So this kind of, you know, is exploring very real issues that I think are kind of relatable to the masses. It's not a heightened world. You know, these are real people in a real town, and unpacking conversations that we should be having. You know, I think it's kind of in the great tradition of Sundance. Content that has, you know, a strong social relevance underneath, which I think is what it takes to kind of get into the hearts of viewers and for them to find worlds and characters that they love and want to stay with. We have second season of Top of the Lake coming out this year. To dovetail on the talent conversation, we have Nicole Kidman joining Elizabeth Moss, and we have Gwendolyn Christie from Game of Thrones. So it's an incredible cast, you know, female talent, female creators, you know, in front and behind the camera, you know, and again, exploring issues around human trafficking and, you know, big global problems that, you know, are not just in any one country's backyard anymore. They're the things we need to be talking about, and they're just wrapped in compelling, you know, human dramas.
Now, before we open it up to questions from the audience, can each of you talk a little bit about what you're looking for when somebody pitches you? What's like a big no-no? What's key? How can these people be more efficient and effective in trying to reach out to you? Maybe we start with you, Andrew.
I think the most important thing is understanding the brand and knowing who you're pitching to, who you know, what's the channel, know the channel basically, and then it's if you know it's the best story, the new way into a story, being innovative. You know, just I mean, how many times I've been in meetings and then somebody gets up and says, "I had this mad thought." And you think, well, that's the one I want to hear more of, because you know it's second guessing in many ways, and I wouldn't do that. I would just like, if you understand the brand and you've got something that you just think is nutty and crazy, I think that's the story you want to hear about, because we hear all the other ones anyway. And also in terms of me getting, you know, it's email, it's paragraph, it's log lines, it's one pages. It's, you know, if it's a fully formed format that, or a proposal that's been to another channel, just make sure you change the name, put the right channel on. And sizzles are always great, but not necessary, you know, coming from the UK. But yeah, it's, you know, pretty informal actually. It's conversation. Conversation's important.
What are you thinking, Laura? Similar?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you'd be amazed at how many times you get a pitch where it says, we get a pitch that says discovery. So I'm like, it's not that hard to change it. Yeah, and I think, you know, just be familiar with what not only what's the brand, but what's on the network, because I think that's just, you know, not a good use of anyone's time. But I agree that a lot of times that people say, oh, well, we weren't going to pitch this to you, and we say, well, what is it? And that's when we know that's what's exciting. I mean, we're always looking for great characters. We're looking for a fresh take on something. We're looking for, in the case, you know, obviously in the case of history, we're looking for what's new. What's the new angle or approach, a piece of information, theory, something we can sort of dig into. Is there a person who hasn't spoken before? Is there a file that's been opened? Is there? I mean, you get the idea. So there needs to be, usually there needs to be some kind of a hook, but there can also be something like, you know, Forged in Fire is in a way is kind of a very simple format. But that came out of somebody saying, maybe they said to themselves, what's chopped for weaponry? I don't know, but that's kind of what we have. So not that it's directly ripping off of Chopped, but inspired by. And yeah, so I think that's, and passion and really sort of, being clear about what your story is and being able to articulate that pretty quickly and sort of getting to it quickly, I think is often sometimes hard. It's you're sort of in love with a whole space, but you don't really have an idea. And I think at least if you start with an idea, we can then develop it together, even if I need to maybe go this part of the story. But I think start with your story and tell it as passionately and clearly and simply as you can.
Now, Chris, for you with script, the more focus on scripted, how's that different from what these guys are?
Well, you know, I think the starting point is definitely have a sense of the brand, you know, but not everyone, you know, has the crystal ball to know what the networks are going to need 6 months or a year from now. There's nothing worse, I know, than when you guys go into a room or you're talking to somebody and they say, bring us your best stuff, but they don't give you anything back in terms of how to calibrate the target or what types of material. So we really focus on, you know, creating conversations with creators, with producers. You know, we spend a lot of time traveling to the different markets as an international team to get to know people. Sometimes it's the third or the fourth conversation where you strike on the idea that you want to do together. But I think that that personal relationship and our, you know, from a scripted perspective, we want to find creators that we're going to work with for some time to come, that we'll have multiple series with, you know, that can kind of stay in the family and become part of the bigger world. But you know, start with your understanding of brand and then ask questions. I think, you know, if commissioners are doing their jobs well, I think that they will take time to explain that to you. You know, we certainly will.
Mm-hmm. And also, if I may just add, in the year that I've been settling in and working into a US company, very, very different. And you know, it sounds obvious, and it is obvious, but it's a tough world. It's a tough market because, you know, the bar is incredibly high. It's very specific. You know, if there's one thing that certainly with Discovery, we know our audience and we know exactly what they like, and we are giving it to them. But you know, if we want to give them something new, we have to really work hard. So, it's got to be persistent. You've got to work hard and have that conversation because it doesn't always happen overnight.
Now, do we have any audience questions? Maybe we start with the gentleman right here in the second row. Oh, there's a microphone coming your way right now.
We are from China International TV Corporation, the Chinese equivalent to BBC Worldwide. As leading decision makers from global networks, my first question is, how do you feel the changing appetite and taste of your audience for content to do all about China? And to follow that, as commissioners, from a commissioner's point of view, what would you expect in terms of format and content from the Chinese production companies and independent producers for this changing taste of your audience?
Well, I think I think there's a lot of ways that companies like ourselves can work with producers out of Asia. There's obviously an incredible amount of IP that still hasn't been mined, that maybe that language barrier is kind of keeping good content from being remade in other markets. But I think too, what you're finding more and more is these kind of production opportunities that exist for series to have mixed language. We have Deutschland 83, which is coming back for a second series on Sundance. It was primarily in German the first year, and this year it'll have South African, it will have English, it'll have French, it'll have, obviously German. But I think that that's exciting, that characters from different worlds can kind of come in. So I think that there's a chance to explore Asian characters from an Asian perspective. I think it's exciting to see people moving away from stories that might, I think for too long there were too many stories where the Russians or the Chinese are the bad guys, and that's a really simplistic way and I think frankly bad way of telling stories. So the fact that people are curious about each other's cultures and worlds, I think is great. I think in terms of production and expectations, which I think was part of the question, I think it's what we hope to offer any of the creators we're working with, which is creative freedom. So I think that, the concern that I think a lot of people have had is, are they able to tell the story fully in the market, in certain markets? Are they able to film certain stories without oversight? And obviously there are different territories that you can go film stories, and we've been doing America and Canada for each other forever. So I think it's just that there are respect for creative freedoms, and that's probably the heart of it. And then you go from there. But I think that we're looking a lot in Asia for new content, for new voices, for directors, for acting talent. So we want to do more of it.
From Discovery's perspective, and I'm in the creative, not business, but we are all, we are global. We've got 240 odd regions that we are in, and we have businesses around in Asia and Africa and everywhere. So, I would imagine we would always be looking to go into new markets and explore and work together with the creatives. And Ed Say, who's sat in front of me, he looks after all the international content and creative, commissioning. So he'll be a good person to talk to, and he'll be able to, help you on the first footsteps. But it goes back to that conversation. But ultimately, it's going to be the story. I'm just going to be reiterating what's just been said. But it's story, and it's exploring those worlds that make sense to the audience in the various brands that that you wanting to sell into.
Do we have another audience question? Yeah, front row. I think there's a young lady coming with the mic.
Just on behalf of A&E Networks, we have a whole, we've been in a big office based in Singapore for the last 10 years. We're launching channels in South Korea, and we're very interested in the Chinese market and getting into the Chinese market, and there's a lot of content that we're creating locally. So I think there's the opportunity both to produce local content for the region, but also to look at ideas that you have that might be formats as a basis for global versions and other regional versions. So definitely interested from the A&E family perspective.
So following on the theme of new voices, I wanted to ask, obviously when you're commissioning a show, working with an experienced production partner who's got lots of credits adds some stability, some solidity to the sort of risk of producing something. But I wondered if you could all give an example of maybe a company, a young company or a young individual who has come through and got a commission and seen real success out of that, and why they were worth going for and how that was successful. And I was putting you on the spot to think of a specific example, but if you can, that'd be great.
I can think of a few, but one you might be surprised to so Left Field, who created Pawn Stars, at the time they came in with that project, they had only a couple of credits. I mean, they had both, the team had each been producers and showrunners on shows that, like Wife Swap and, really big shows, but so they had some credits as individuals, but not as this new company. And so, and of course that has turned into, the biggest show that History Channel ever had, well, unscripted, I should say, show that History ever had. And obviously they've all gone on to do very well. And there are a number of other examples like that. I think as much as we, as big companies, like the comfort of working with people who we know have great track records, nobody gets it right all the time. And we know that a lot of the people that we've worked with for a long time didn't have those track records when we started with them. So we remind ourselves that fresh perspective is as important as what you think is what is a track record. So we try to mix it up.
I've always followed the story and the idea, and I always look for that. And there was a chap who was my editor when I was making films, and he set up his own company, and I commissioned him. It was his first commission. He barely had an office. But the idea was right, the idea was great, it was good, and I gave him two options. I said to him, you're either going to be umbrellaed by a bigger company, or you're going to talk to these three execs who I knew could deliver the show. I mean, I wasn't that sort of, you have to do it, but this is what, as a company, we want to help you along. And he was open to that, and that got him on his feet. He worked with Simon Ford, who's one of our top exec producers in this country, and he's now got a business that stands on its own 2 feet, and he's working across many channels.
I think to touch on what was said a little bit earlier, there's this incredible democratization of content, and I think you can't discount technology and what that allows people to do in terms of being a young filmmaker, doing shorts. Having a web series, just kind of bringing your content directly to the audience. So, it's exciting that we can have access to voices that maybe would only have percolated up years ago from the indie film market or what have you. We are constantly looking at breaking new voices. On the AMC side, we've had, 4 wonderful seasons of 'Halt and Catch Fire. But when those guys started, they were a young creative duo. That was their first spec, and they got, introduced to people that believed in their voice. And I think that's what it comes down to. At the end of the day, we always kind of say, you stake your job on this voice. And there's a lot of really fresh perspective out there. We're working with a young, actress that had never written, but had done a lot of, theater. And she has, in a very short amount of time, proven herself to be an incredibly strong, new creative force that we're working with, and just takes the notes and executes, and we work with her very closely, and it's been a fun process, but we'll also find young voices or emerging voices and pair them with the right people to elevate and support what they want to do, and I think that's good for everybody. New blood in the businesses, we all need it, and you never know where the next great idea is going to come from.
I hate to say it, but our time is up, unfortunately. I want to say thank you to Laura, Chris, Andrew, and thank you for coming out, guys.
Thank you.